Good morning again. This is not how I pictured this morning was going to go. I thought I would be happy and comfortable in the Zendo, but as I think most of you know, my wife caught COVID and she's been sleeping upstairs and I've been sleeping downstairs, but we're going to play it safe and I'm going to stay home today and talk to you over Zoom. So what I wanted to talk about today was the repentances, specifically the first 4 lines that we all chant on the repentances and in the Bodhisattva ceremony. And this is because, as sometimes happens for me, sometimes these chants, I hear them in a new way. On some random day, I've chanted them 1,000 times, and yet at some point I hear them in a new way. And so the first line, well, let me read to you what I'm talking about. So the lines are, all my ancient and twisted karma from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. It's very common. I think all of us have chanted it a bunch, but one day I heard it in a new way. I had always heard all my ancient and twisted karma in a very personal and individual way, all of my ancient and twisted karma. This time though, when we were in the Zendo chanting it, I understood this to be the whole world's karma that we're all inheriting. We inherit the causes and conditions, the actions and the consequences of the whole world. This is how we find ourselves in the cultures we're in, the societal norms that we follow, the systems of power, the family units, the world we're living in with the danger to the environment, as well as the positive things like modern medicine, the world becoming more accepting of different expressions of love, and sushi, right? All these things are the karma of the world that we all inherit. So like I said at the beginning, we're talking about the karma of the whole world. Since everything is empty of inherent existence, interconnected and interpenetrating, and I should stop now and tell you that pretty much everything in my life is viewed through the lens of this emptiness, right? I spent a whole bunch of time talking about the Heart Sutra, and you're going to see similar themes because I just can't help myself. So because everything is empty of inherent existence, interconnected, interpenetrating, there's really no way this couldn't be so. There isn't a way we couldn't be inheriting the karma of the whole world. We are constantly contributing to and inheriting this world activity all the time. Before we go further into that, I think it's important to talk about what karma is and isn't. Karma is a Sanskrit word, karma in Pali, that literally is translated as action, right? So we're talking about actions and consequences. The law of karma refers to this law of cause and effect, that every volitional act brings about a certain result. It is important to be clear that karma is morally neutral. So this is not about rewards and punishments. That is not what karma is about. It's about actions and consequences. It's a little different. So an example I like is if I throw a baseball and it ricochets off a tree and breaks my neighbor's window. It's just what happened. It's another example of cause and effect. But the broken window is not a moral punishment from the universe. It's just what happened, the cause and the effect, the action and the consequence. Another example I really like is if I plant an apple tree. I'm not going to get a fruit tree that bears mangoes. One fruit is not spiritually or morally superior to the other one. Mangoes and apples are both great. But one will grow based on the action that I took in planting a particular tree. All of that being said, it is also true that the energy we bring into these actions, our intentionality, makes a difference. If I am angry or scared and I heedlessly start throwing baseballs, I am much more likely to break a window. It's also easy to see that if I'm acting in an uncontrolled or heedless way, I'm churning up the waters of my life and the life around me and making it much harder. If I start throwing baseballs at other people, they might throw baseballs back at me. And so these actions have consequences. But I'm gonna say it a lot. This is action and result, action and consequence, not moral judgment. And this takes us to the kind of the ancient part of the ancient and twisted karma. One of the things that I've always been very uncomfortable with, even though, or maybe because karma is morally neutral, is seeing bad things happen to people. And because I'm a school teacher, my mind goes to little kids. The idea that it's a natural consequence for them to be born into poverty or abusive family situations or with a incurable sickness or disease. That they did something that has caused this reaction, that they deserve it in somehow. One way to rationalize this idea is reincarnation, that they engage in actions in a past life, and that energy is continued through, and now they've been reborn into this particular situation in a subsequent life. But frankly, and unequivocally, I reject that. That does not work for me. What makes more sense to me is that we all inherit the karma of the world. There's a lot of momentum in this society we live in this country that we're in the world that's going on, in the universe that's constantly doing its thing. And it honestly seems a little ludicrous to me that we would think that only our actions are going to have an effect on what's going on with us and around us. That's not saying we don't affect our lives. We obviously do. But I don't think it's hard to see how, where, and when we were born, the socioeconomic conditions we were born into, our family unit, the physical things that we inherit, all play a massive role. So if we go back to the baseball analogy, if I am born into a family that's all throwing baseballs, I can certainly make it more or less likely to damage a window with the way I throw baseballs. But it's also true that I have to account for what's going on with my family of baseball throwing goofballs, and I still might take a baseball to the head, right? Those things are true. So for me, when we talk about ancient and twisted karma, I don't think of past lives. I think of the universe doing its thing and how we contribute and inherit to the universal karma, universal action all the time. And that brings us to the twisted part of the first line, the twisted. This could mean twisted as in bad or messed up. You know, I think we all have actions in our past that we regret, that we consider. But when I hear twisted, especially in this way that I'm talking about, what I hear is twisted together, tangled together. The world is interconnected, interpenetrating. And so when I hear twisted, tangled, maybe even Indra's net. I know some of us really like the Indra's net metaphor, and a net is really just a fancy kind of tangling. And so this twisted entanglement reminds us that we are all in this together, that we cannot help but affect the world and those around us. And that even if we go and hide ourselves away in a cave, we cannot help but be affected by the world at the same time. So my karma is the action and consequences of the whole world in this moment. So ancient and twisted karma, there's a lot in there for me. The school teacher in me wants to go stop. Are there any questions? But I'm just going to go through. So if we look at the next line, from beginningless, greed, hate, and delusion. Beginningless, to me, sounds a whole lot like emptiness. All conditioned, not beginning or ending. Beginningless could mean a really long time ago, but I think they really mean beginningless, boundless, emptiness, like we were talking about in the Heart Sutra. And if something is a beginningless, it is also endless, no beginning, no end. It doesn't fit the case. This is the Saha world. Greed, hate, and delusion are not things, but they are part of the process of the world all the time. Greed, hate, and delusion are part of the activity of the world, this world, all the time. And greed, hate, and delusion are really important in this line because traditionally, these are known as the three poisons, right? It's a very core Buddhist teaching. So I feel like we have to break down these a little bit. Greed is a particular kind of desire, an unquenchable thirst. The word is tana in Pali, craving and lust. We want the objects of our desire to provide us with lasting satisfaction. So we feel fulfilled and whole all the time, complete, happy, comfortable. And so we find ourselves, when we get caught in this poison of greed, striving all the time towards this unattainable goal, because we kind of mistakenly believe that our happiness is dependent on it. And if we get this thing, that we're lusting after, it will fix everything forever, right? That's the greed piece. This will make me happy. If we get that thing, all of us, I really want that perfect job, that perfect partner, that perfect sushi dinner, and we get the thing, and we don't find the lasting satisfaction. And rather than going, oh, maybe I'm not, we just reorient to the next thing. I got to get the promotion, or I have to get a younger partner, or I have to get the chocolate cake after the sushi dinner, right? We just reorient to the next thing. And that will definitely do it. This will definitely bring us lasting satisfaction forever. We just reorient that greed to the next thing. Another way this manifests, rather than a grabbing to us, is a refusal to give, right? That lack of compassion and generosity, because clearly whatever resource I need for my happiness, it's finite, so I got to hold it to myself and not give it to people. And I think if we pay attention, we can see how deeply rooted this is, right? It's very fundamental. And because we're still talking about the karma of the world, we can see this in other people and other institutions, sometimes easier than in ourselves, because it's so much easier to see the foibles of other people, right, than ours. But that's a thing. And we can see this in business, in politics, in the way we're treating the environment. This greed, this grasping, this trying to take or trying to withhold, we see this in the systems that we're in all the time. And we are affected by those systems, and we do contribute to them. So this greed I'm talking about is the world activity piece. It's not just what we do on an individual level. But it can be really scary to become intimate with that greed, right? Because it can be very painful. And that's why we get to the avowing piece of this, which I'll get more into later. We can experience our greed in trivial circumstances, like the sushi. Like I love sushi, so it's a fun joke to make, but also like I have felt greed regarding some good ahi tuna. And of course, it can manifest in compulsive and destructive ways as well. We always want more, bigger, better. We want to fulfill that insatiable thirst. It shows up in our personal lives, our professional lives, and like I said, international business and politics, global conflict, warfare. I think it's very easy if we look at like the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because some of the personalities are shoved onto the stage, right? It's very easy to be like, oh, that person and that person and that person, their greed, their grasping, not understanding that we're part of that too. But I think it's easy to see. And if we're not careful, this greed is going to help destroy the planet. So it can certainly destroy our lives, and our lives are connected to this whole world, and we're looking at ways this is going to destroy the whole world. So that's a little bit about greed. Hatred is a little different. Hatred is kind of your classic, I don't like this. It can show up as anger, hostility, dislike, aversion, ill will towards a person or a thing. This I don't like this feeling, which at its very worst results in wishing harm or suffering on someone else. Another person. We think that we're justified in this because somehow this will ease our own suffering. With aversion, we kind of habitually, we resist, we deny, we try to avoid unpleasant feelings, circumstances, people we don't like. There's definitely people in the world I don't like, and I'll cheerfully miss an opportunity to interact with them if that's how it is. But if I get really stuck on that and turn that into that ill will, that hatred, that aversion, it's problematic for both of us. We want everything to be pleasant, comfortable, and satisfying. And so anything that might mess with that, we hate it. We don't like it. We want it to go away. We want to push it away. And this behavior does reinforce our perception of duality and separation. Hatred or anger puts us into a vicious cycle of always finding conflict and enemies everywhere around us. This is kind of like the other thing of greed. In greed, we want to grab something, and if we get it, we just reorient to the next thing. With hatred, we almost build enemies or situations we don't like because we're not feeling that endless satisfaction. So it must be something's fault. And if it's not this, it must be this one. And we get into this habit of hatred, this habit of ill will. When there's conflict or perceived enemies around us, our mind is neurotic. Pretty hard to be calm if you're busy hating something. And we start to have an aversion to our own uncomfortable feelings. Hatred can be self-hatred. This is important. We do this. We deny, we resist, we push away our own inner feelings of hurt, loneliness, and we treat those feelings like an internal enemy. And with the poison of hatred, we create conflict and enemies in the world all around us and inside our own being. We can very easily populate a world of nothing but enemies in our minds. That happens. And I think we can see those, again, on the world stage, in our work, in our families, that world karma, we can see this happening, that world being populated with enemies. So delusion then, the third poison. And I know we've talked about this in other things, kind of like when we talk about the Eightfold Path, right? We've said it's more like a multi-lane highway. It's not like it's not sequential. It's the same with the three poisons. This is a multi-lane highway. There's a lot of blending that goes on, right? They reinforce each other, right? They inform each other, but we break them up for simplicity's sake. Delusion is our wrong understanding or wrong view of reality. Delusion is our misperception of the way the world works, our inability to understand the nature of things as they are. Affected by the poison of delusion, which arises from ignorance of our true nature and the nature of all things, we do not understand the interdependence and impermanent nature of life. Because of this, we're constantly looking for things outside of ourselves to blame for those uncomfortable feelings, labeling them as the other, or we're constantly looking outside of ourselves for the happiness, the satisfaction, and the solution to our problems. And man, we get pissed off when we don't find it. And this outward searching creates even more frustration and anger and delusion. So this multi-lane highway of poisons is always reinforcing each other if we're not careful, if we don't try to catch it. And not understanding emptiness reinforces this. We want these things, the people, the situations outside of ourselves that will be permanent and bring us that permanent sense of happiness or peace or joy. So these three poisons are kind of what keep us caught in this cycle. So line number 3 is born through body, speech, and mind. And I really was wanting to think about this in kind of this worldview. So I kind of broke each of these up into 2 little pieces. So to start with, we're kind of talking about that world piece. The body is the bodies of those that came before, that brought us into this human realm, right? The karma of the world is being generated in the physical manifestation of our ancestors and the people going on. So the cause and conditions that brought us into this human realm in this time and this place and this culture, we are inheritors of the physicality of what came before. And so that can be genetics, of course, your height, your coloring, maybe your physical gifts and your limitations. I'm never going to play NBA professional basketball. That's just not how I'm built. Also, the environmental factors manifested in our bodies, the foods that we eat, the toxins that we're exposed to, the geographical area we're born in has a huge impact. Our food choices, again, the socioeconomic factors. As a high school teacher, and working with at-risk kids, the number one thing that I see for kids with their struggles is that kind of socioeconomic piece, right? If you take any student, regardless of their gifts, and they're starving or they're cold or they're sick, if those physical things are happening, success is really tough. So all these factors play a huge role in how we've arrived in this moment before we even get to our intentional actions, which I think is what most people think of when we say karma, through body, speech, and mind. But before we even get to the intentional physical actions, the physical reality we live in is huge part. The very few students that I worked with that were true sociopaths, there's a physical component there that, frankly, no amount of cognitive behavioral therapy is necessarily going to change. Or students with, just incurable diseases, chronic pain, chronic fatigue. Those things are huge, and it affect their intentional actions and even their intentional understanding of the world to a massive degree. And you can't separate yourself from the body, right? So the physical body you inhabit has a huge impact on all of these choices that we're going to make. And a lot of our day-to-day experiences are felt in our body. The fight or flight reflex, if you're hungry, if you're anxious, has a huge effect on the mental and emotional state and how we act. So just the world karma in the physical form of our body before we even get to our individual intentional actions is pretty massive. But of course, we are talking about physical actions, as well as the interplay between what we might consider speech, mind, and the body. If I go kick a puppy, that is an intentional physical action. It's going to hurt the puppy. It might physically hurt my leg. I think it's going to cause a negative cascade of feelings through my body. That's my experience when I've done something bad. As well as all the practical outcomes, like I might get yelled at, I might get fined or arrested, I might lose my friends or my partner or my community if you find out I make a habit of going and kicking puppies. I also might attract the kind of toxic people into my life that think kicking puppies is a good idea. And again, this is not a moral judgment, although you might feel like I deserve all these things. This is an outcome of the action that I took. So even when we might have some feelings of judgment towards Mark went and kicked a puppy, and he deserves these negative things, a hurt body, bad feelings, losing friends, toxic people showing up, it's still action and consequence. It's not a moral judgment from the universe. So then we turn to speech. So speech, again, at that kind of world level, is the teachings and the cultures and the ideas of and the norms that we live in that contribute to how we comprehend and conceptualize both ourselves and the world around us. This is really important. The way we talk about things has an enormous impact on how we relate to the world. And we see this everywhere, from media to education to slang. And we have words that are very, very loaded. There's a rapper that I quite like. His name is Macklemore, and he does a lot of kind of social awareness raps. And one of his older songs, he was talking about gay slurs in the rap and the R&B community. And one of his lines is that gay is synonymous with the lesser. And if you think about that, there's so much there, just that one word, right? And gay became equated to bad, to lesser. If someone is gay in that community, they might internalize a lot of feelings of hate and shame and isolation. They might withdraw within themselves, they might lash out. So even this line in this one song about criticizing the gay is synonymous with the lesser is kind of pointing out how incredibly loaded certain words within a culture can be in ways that we don't even understand necessarily. But if someone grows up in a world where gay is synonymous with the lesser, even if nobody tells them, hey, you're bad for being gay, their entire worldview is going to be informed by that, the way they relate to everything around them. So these words in these cultures that we're in, before we get to our intentional word choices, massive, massive impact. And if anybody here has worked with multiple languages, we sometimes see where a language will have words for certain things that has no equivalent in the other language. So literally, people from one language will think and conceptualize of the world in ways that people that speak another language can't or don't. And we see this all the time when we're trying to translate Buddhist words from Sanskrit or Pali to English or Japanese to English. We see this a lot. And like, dukkha and sunyata are two really important ones. Jaku says a lot that translating sunyata into emptiness was possibly the worst translation thing that has ever happened in Western Buddhism, because of all the baggage that we put onto that. I actually had somebody email me this week asking me how to deal with emptiness and loneliness in Zen. And when we started talking about it, we had to unpack empty of inherent existence versus what they were kind of working with, which was the nihilism and the negation. That's what they had kind of put in with emptiness, but it's a loaded term, right? In our language, right? It's different. And it's really important. One of the things that we talk about in fighting when I teach my martial arts students is that if you have to be able to conceive of yourself doing something before you can do it. You cannot conceive of a thing, you cannot really work with it. And so this often means using language, speech that resonates with people, which is why when we talk about emptiness, for example, we have to say, maybe boundless works for you, maybe Buddha nature works for you, maybe empty of inherent existence works for you, but we have to find the words that resonate with the feeling. And so this same person that emailed me about emptiness, they are also a martial artist, and they were really struggling because their teacher comes from a very kind of aggressive kind of philosophy. And so what they were being told is, go out there and I want you to think, fuck that guy, this is my field, I'm going to take it. And this person is actually pretty sensitive. It didn't work for them. And so when we were talking about using the language of flow to work with the opponent, that worked better for them. And so, but maybe flow language wouldn't work for a different fighter, and F that guy would be great for somebody else. It's just, so we inherit and we contribute to the story of language we exist in, with all of the positive and the negative consequences that naturally flow from that. Just kind of in general. So then we look at intentional speech, our intentional speech. This is the words we use to self and others that harm and delude. And I think this is probably what most people think of when we consider karma in speech. If we engage in harmful or reckless speech, if we lie, if we gossip, we're going to naturally make life harder for ourselves and for the world around us. And I think this is pretty easy to see. I know that every time I verbally lashed out at someone in my life, it's really never made my life go better or help somebody understand my cause and my point of view better. It's never really worked out for me. And I've never had anyone lash out at me and felt, well, now I trust that person more. I feel more comfortable with that person that just screamed at me. That's never worked out. So we can see that this kind of, nasty speech, this heedless speech doesn't really work too well if what we want is to, get along better in the world. And I definitely found that I see that in politics a lot. I have friends on kind of all sides of the political spectrum. And what I see is often is they get, and I definitely have political opinions, but what I'm saying is I see people, they get caught in the one-upmanship or scoring points on each other. And there's not really anything that ever gets accomplished other than everybody gets pissed off. So lashing out doesn't tend to do much good. It does keep the cycle of strife going though. So, I mean, if that's the goal, then go nuts. All right, and then finally we get to mind, body, speech, and mind. And mind is the thoughts and ideas we have about reality and kind of the world around us. But kind of like what we were talking about with the loaded terms thing, it's important to talk about when we say mind, shin, especially Westerners, we tend to think intellect, right? Ideas, thoughts, not those messy emotions, those are over there somewhere. But that's not actually what mind means. Mind is mind, heart, right? It's both. So it's thoughts and emotions. And it's also important to note that thoughts are considered a type of action, right? So it's not, action is not just kicking the puppy. Action would be actually thinking about kicking the puppy, right? Or some of those thoughts that we have. So when we engage in thoughts that are violent, disruptive, self-harming, and I'm saying engage for a specific reason. We all know that as we've been sitting for a while, that sometimes thoughts just pop up, right? That's what the brain does, thoughts pop up. But when we engage in these harmful thoughts, if we don't catch them, if we instead grab onto them and add energy to them and think, oh, yep, that's right, I'm definitely a piece of shit, right? Because self-harming thoughts are really, those are powerful. When we engage in those things, it's not causing good stuff for us. And in my experience, when we're interacting with the world, with the people, some of the people that have the most harmful self-talk also lash out most. And these thoughts, I find, really grind those emotional grooves. It's kind of instant karma, right? Instant karma. If I habitually engage in thoughts of, I'm terrible, right? I'm lazy, I'm stupid, that kind of thing. When I run into roadblocks, where's my mind going to go? Automatically, it's going to go into those grooves that I ground already. And so those thoughts, are really going to kind of mess things up. And that can be to me, or that can be to somebody else. If I'm also a habitual blamer, that person sucks. I'm always looking for that person to blame. Either way, that's where I'm going to go if I'm kind of grinding those grooves. And so we really just reinforce those bad thoughts and feelings, which, like I said, it's the multi-lane highway, right? Body, speech, and mind, three poisons. It's all connected. If we're habitually engaging in those unwholesome thoughts, it's going to lead to unwholesome actions. And the more we do it, the more it's going to reinforce itself. So now we get to avow. I now fully avow. This was, I think, the most interesting piece for me to kind of tease apart, to examine, because it's called the repentances, but in these 4 lines, we're not talking about, and now I reject it. That's not in here. A vow, the definition of a vow, is to declare assuredly, to declare openly, bluntly, and without shame, right? Why do we avow then? Because that sounds kind of sucky and uncomfortable. It's not easy, but it's really important. However, it's also important that this is not performatory. We're not performing, right? We're not making a big deal about it. We're just openly, bluntly, and without shame. Because we cannot deal with roadblocks, with the root causes of suffering, until we fully acknowledge and know them. This goes for our personal intentions and actions, as well as the systems that we live in, right? If we don't know and understand what we're dealing with, we can't deal with it. But this openly, bluntly, and without shame is very much key here. This is not about punishment, not from ourselves, not from our community. If we turn this into just another way to beat ourselves up, calling ourselves name, it's just another game our delusional ego can use to reify the self, right? We can identify with being terrible just as easily as we can identify with being awesome. I don't know about you, but I have definitely gone through periods in my life when I have defined myself by my pain, to the point that I didn't want to let go of it because I didn't know who I was without it. I was scared to let go. But this is not helpful. It's an easy trap to fall into, though. I think all of us have probably fallen into this a time or two. So we avow. We acknowledge, no dressing it up with gold filigree to make ourselves feel better, but also not turning it into a weapon to harm ourselves. That middle path is pretty tough, but that's what we're trying to do with a vow. This does not excuse us from consequences. This is just not about punishment. So again, if I do go kick that puppy, or I do speak heedlessly to somebody at the Zendo, I still have to deal with the consequences of that. That's important, but it's not about punishing myself. One of the terms that I really like is making friends. I say this all the time. When I first started studying with Jaku, she told me I had to make friends with my anger. And I said, well, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that at all. But making friends is, again, getting to know yourself, getting to know these things intimately with these habitual patterns that we etch into ourselves. Doesn't mean we have to have great affection for them, but it does mean that we need to become intimately familiar with how our 3 poisons manifest in our body, speech, and mind. Not to destroy them. It doesn't exactly work that way. After all, Buddha did not see Mara under the Bodhi tree and then react with disgust or anger or rejection. That's just the 3 poisons manifesting in a new way. The ego is a very tricky fish, and reacting in this way would have been falling into another of Mara's traps. Strengthening that whole and healthy cycle. One of the tattoos that I have is from Zen Master Raven. It's one of my favorite books. It's Aiken Roshi wrote it before he passed away. And it's forest animals giving Zen teachings. It's kind of Aesop's fable style. I love it. And one of them, one of the animals goes to Zen Master Raven and goes, Roshi, I'm really frustrated because I'm coming to the Zendo and I'm meditating, I'm listening to lectures, and I don't feel like I'm getting it. And it seems like other people are understanding and moving along in their practice, and I just feel really stupid. And Raven said, well, that's Mara prodding you. And the animal says, well, it hurts. And Raven says, well, that's the only way he knows. And that was really big for me. We can hate that part of ourselves. We can push it away and we can try to destroy it. And all we're going to do is compound our own suffering. Or we can get to know it. Mara, I see you as Mara. Right? So again, and I have found that because this isn't just our karma, that we're avowing the suffering of the world, that this makes it, I find that this creates a more spacious way for me. right? It's easier. It is sometimes easier to have compassion for others than yourself. But when you start relating this to the world, right, this is kind of a gateway of compassion for self and others, is what I found. Running a little long. So I'll kind of end with how I started this. So when I had the idea for this talk, because I heard these lines in a new way, I went home and I just blotted a bunch of notes. And I ended up with a couple pages of notes, and I sent it to Jaco. I'm like, hey, here's my thought. Just let me know if I'm full of it or if this sounds pretty good. And she's like, yeah, that sounds good. Go for it. And the thing that struck me when I was starting to work on this the first day when I started writing down these notes is that we are avowing the karma of the whole world when we do this. And this means that we are in a way bearing witness and responding to our pain and the pain of all sentient beings. We are the cries of the world and the responder. We manifest Canon Bodhisattva, who hears the cries of the world, who is never separate from us. But in this moment of avowing, whether it's in the repentances or in the Bodhisattva ceremony, or anytime we do this chant, Canon Bodhisattva is realized for us and with us and as us. And we have this chance to wake up with and as the whole world. So I'm going to end there. Thank you. And if Randy, you would stop the recording, that would be great. Oh, okay. Thoughts or questions? I'm quite curious to hear what everybody, if anybody has anything to say, because I think